In this video, we're going to take a look at placing a subquery into a from clause. So we're going to once again study the different kinds of data or the structure of data that must be returned from a subquery in order for us to use it inside of a from. Now, understanding subqueries and from statements is going to be just a little bit more challenging than understanding a subquery inside of a select. And that's because a subquery inside of a from is a little bit more flexible. Whenever we put a subquery into a from clause, we can return a wide variety of different structure of data. It's all about making sure that the outer query is compatible with the subquery. What does that mean? Well, I'll show you what that means in just a moment. First, I want to consider a subquery that you see right here. So this is a subquery that we want to somehow write out and then use as a source of data inside of an outer query. The goal of the subquery is to calculate the name and the price divided by the weight of each individual product. The price divided by weight, we're going to refer to that as a price-weight ratio. You can imagine that maybe this is going to calculate how profitable it is to ship any given item, assuming that maybe we have to pay more money to ship an item that is heavier. That is our subquery. Let's go and run just that subquery by itself right now and investigate the structure of data that comes back from it. Okay, so back over here, I'm going to do a select name and price divided by weight, and then I'm going to rename this column right here. I'm going to apply an alias to it with as price weight ratio. I'll then say from products, and that's it. That is our subquery. Now, if we run that, we'll see the name of all of our different products along with our price to weight ratio. So this is a source of data that we can make use of inside of a from clause. Remember that a from clause in general is specifying a set of rows that we want to use inside of our query. So whenever we write out a subquery inside of a from clause, we're essentially saying that there is some kind of special source of data that we want to use in this particular case. Now, before I show you one follow-up diagram to help you just really understand this entire picture, there's one more thing I want to mention very quickly. Whenever we make use of a subquery inside of a from clause, we must apply an alias to the result of the subquery. So this right here, where I say as p, that is setting up an alias. We can now refer to this source of data, whatever the result of the subquery is, anywhere else inside of the outer query by referring to p. Now, again, I'll give you a good example of that and tell you more about it in just a moment. I just want to throw it out there right away, because as soon as you start putting a subquery into a from clause, you're going to see an error around this alias stuff if you don't put it in. Okay, so enough of all these kind of like corner cases. Let me give you a little bit more big picture and really walk through the example with this price to weight ratio stuff. Okay, so we're going to again consider just the subquery by itself. The result of the subquery is it's going to take a look at all of our different products. We're going to take a look only at the columns name, price, and weight. Price and weight are actually going to kind of fall off here because we're just doing some math on them, and we are getting a new column called price to weight ratio. So we can imagine that our real source of data here is going to be just some column called price to weight ratio. And there's going to be some numbers inside of it that get calculated from the price and the weight. Maybe something like this, who knows? That is our source of data. This source of data is then available to the outer query. We can apply any kind of selects, any froms, any wheres, anything like that that we want to inside of the outer query. So in this particular case, we could try to select the name and the price to weight ratio from this source of data. We can also apply a where to it as well. So we could say where price to weight ratio is greater than 5. Now you'll notice that on this diagram right here, I've got these two boxes, and I'm saying that, well, we need to make sure that the outer select is compatible. What does that really mean? The result of the subquery has only columns name and price to weight ratio. So inside of our select statement, if we asked for just price by itself, we would get an error. And that's because there is no price column inside of our subquery. The result of the subquery is just the two columns you see right here. If we ask for a column price, we're going to get an error because that column does not exist. Likewise, if we tried to put in just weight, we would also get an error because in the result of our subquery, there is no weight column. The only columns we have access to are name and price to weight ratio. Same thing with the where clause down here as well. If we try to refer to price, we're going to get an error because that column doesn't exist. If we try to refer to weight, nope, can't do it. We can't take a look at ID. The only things we can take a look at are name and price to weight ratio. Now, at this point in time, you might be kind of curious and thinking, wait, Stephen, why would we even use a subquery here? Well, to be 100% fair, we do not have to write out a subquery in this particular case. We could write out essentially this query by itself and then just apply a where statement to it, and it would give us the same result. I'm only showing you this as a very quick, easy to understand example of some of the rules around a from clause that has a subquery inside of it. We'll take a look at an example of why we would want to use a subquery inside of a from clause in just a little bit, but for right now, I just want to understand the rules. Now let's go and try to write out both the subquery and the outer query together. Okay, so back over here, I'm going to delete everything I have, and I will replace it with select name and price weight ratio from, and then we're going to put in our subquery right here. This is the source of rows to the outer query. So we will select name and price divided by weight as price weight ratio. I'm going to put a new line inside of here just to give myself a little bit more space. And then to finish off the subquery, we'll put in from products. And then finally, on the outer query, we'll put in our where. We'll say only show rows where the price to weight ratio is greater than 5, like so. Okay, so let's run this. And you're going to see an error right away. So this is an error that you're going to see very frequently whenever you are trying to make use of a subquery inside of a from clause. The error that you're going to see is subquery and from must have an alias. So that is the gotcha that I mentioned just a moment ago. Whenever you make use of a subquery inside of a from clause, you have to apply an alias to the result of the subquery. So we could put on here something just like as E, E being short for products. Now I can run this, and we get our result. So we'll see the name and the price to weight ratio. Okay, so at this point in time, I know using this subquery right here doesn't make a lot of sense because we could really just write the subquery by itself and get the same result. But we are going to take a look at a better example of why we would make use of a subquery inside of a from clause in just a little bit. First, I want to consider one other scenario, one other way that we can make use of a subquery inside of a from clause, and then we'll understand why we would do this at all.